And today I want to talk about the thing that makes someone an alcoholic. Now, I want to say right off the bat that I'm not considering this to be something that's definitive. Please do not use this as some sort of diagnostic tool if you're really wondering this for your own well-being. Seek some sort of professional help, maybe reach out to someone in the community or someone in your circle of friends or people you know that might be in recovery too. There's more of us out there than you may think. But I do want to talk about this because I think it's important for people to know, and I also think it's fairly interesting. So again, if you're wondering this question for yourself or someone that you know, or you're just curious about this type of stuff, here's how I'll make my case. So when it comes to alcoholism, it's not as clear cut, I think, as people would think it would be. I mean, you have your cases which are pretty obvious. You have like the Skid Row type of drunk, or the hopeless drunk who wakes up every morning and the first thing he does is take a hit off the bottle that's near his bedside. Or you can see him waiting at a gas station, waiting for it to open at 6 in the morning so he can get his vodka. Those last two things are yours truly. But there's a lot of other circumstances and the ways that people are that kind of blur this line. I mean, I have known, I spent a good portion of my drinking days in isolation. But there was a time where I drank with other friends, drank with people, and I knew a lot of heavy drinkers, and I knew quite a bit of people who would turn out to be alcoholic. Misery does love company. But I tell you, there's plenty of times where there was people that I totally imagined that, man, they're probably alcoholic, who really didn't turn out to be. I mean, I thought, man, if they're drinking like I am, that's not a good thing. But, there are some people that are just heavy drinkers, or there's some circumstances or phases people go through where they can drink with alcoholic behaviors, but then they kind of just grow out of it, or they phase out of that period. Like I can tell you, for example, during COVID, when it was the thick of it, and a lot of people were just working from home and isolated, it started to seem to me like there was a lot more alcoholics out there than I thought. Like, there was so many people that were talking about they were starting to drink, right after work, or maybe even during work. They're not on a Zoom meeting, or they're just not working, or they're doing day drinking, and they're not tailgating or other things. I mean, it's just like classic what you think would be alcoholic behavior. But then as time wore on, or as they just started feeling like crap too much, they just kind of stopped. There's a lot of type of tests I remember taking, like chemical dependency tests, where they would have some list of how many drinks do you have a week, how many days do you drink a week, how many times do you drink to excess, and boom, right there we'll measure if you're an alcoholic. And I tell you what, if those tests were to be truly true and accurate, then just about most of my friends in college were alcoholics, which they're not. And there's other things you can look at which can be more obvious, such as consequences that happen. When alcohol is getting you into trouble a lot, and there's certainly markers that hint towards alcoholism, like if you keep drinking in the face of those consequences. But like I said, there is blurred lines. A lot of people classify the drinking profiles in three ways. There's your social drinker, there's the problem drinker, and there's the alcoholic. And those two, the alcoholic and problem drinker, can really blur between each other without them being necessarily alcoholic, and having the ability to drop it if the occasion comes. Where I saw this kind of blurred line between the two a lot was in the AA meetings that I attend. So a lot of people would be in AA meetings because they would have to come in on a court card. They got a DUI or something, and they're on probation, and they have to go to this many AAs a week. And I used to call it the Court County Scholarship Program. There'd be plenty of people who would just kind of listen to the stories we tell and be totally freaked out. This was not the place for them. They just happened to be stupid and were drinking on a 4th of July, and the cop stopped them. There was other people who probably should have been there and were in denial, but there was also a lot of people that I talked to many times who were just truly not sure. And I would never, ever make the diagnosis for them or that sort of judgment call, for two main reasons. One, it is simply not my place. I do not know what's in your heart and mind, and I'm not going to make that call. And the second thing is, it wouldn't matter anyways. What word would be of mine to convince you of something that is, either so evidently true that everybody else in your life has been telling you, I think you have a problem and you need to seek help, or that, you just don't want to face. I mean, it's the point is that you're not going to convince someone they're an alcoholic if they really don't want to believe it. And again, going back to it, it's not my place anyways. But with all that being said, I want to get to that thing I think is a really, really good dividing line between the person that is just a heavy drinker, a problem drinker, going through some like heavy phase of drinking, and an alcoholic. And that is this. Alcoholics, once they drink, they cannot stop. And that may seem kind of stupidly simplistic or maybe even obvious, but it has some nuance to it. There's been plenty of people I know where they don't have the urge to drink. It's not as if they're in the atmosphere. They go to bars or they're around people that's drinking, and once that starts, then they really want to drink. There's been plenty of people I know who would turn out to be alcoholics, their own self-admittance of it, and certainly live the life of it. But they talked about plenty of times where they didn't really want to drink. Like something that was the antithesis to what you think an alcoholic would be. There was they would mention plenty of times, maybe even months would go by, or just certain things are like, oh, I couldn't drink because I was really studying hard in this, this master's program, or I was in the military. In my mind, I'm thinking, I don't care. If you're an alcoholic, you drink anyways, right? But they would always talk about this factor where once they did drink, even if they went into a situation where they didn't want to drink in the first place, once they got alcohol in their system, they could not stop. Or there's a part B to this. If there was something that was intervening where they could not drink, it would be miserable. It would be the only thing on their mind. Because, earlier in my days when I wasn't such a raging alcoholic, there was plenty of times where I was just going to have a few. I remember there was like a first date where I did that. There were some times where I insanely was like the designated driver for a group of friends. I don't know if I was just trying to prove myself to someone or whatever. There's times where I was around work people and I really didn't want to get drunk and foolish. And, I thought to myself, well, I just had one or two, and then I put it down, and that was it. Must not be alcoholic. But if I really was honest about it and looked over those times thoroughly, I remember I did that, and I took everything of me to not drink, and I was miserable. I mean, here's kind of a contradictory thing, and many other fellow alcoholics feel the same way too. There's many times where it was almost better to not have any alcohol at all than to just have one or two. You would rather just not have any than to have that thing ignite in your head once you start drinking. And that thing that I'm talking about, that switch, I think that is really the designation line of what separates an alcoholic from whatever you have. A problem drinker, heavy drinker, someone in college in the Midwest, whatever you want to call it. And there's people that, while there's a lot of similarities between alcoholics, there's people that take different paths. There's plenty of people I know, particularly a lot of women that didn't start drinking until way later in their life. When the kids left, and when they started drinking, they thought it was just, well, I have an empty nest syndrome and blah, 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 blah. But they had that same thing too, though. They had that same thing of once they started, they could not stop. I know people that would really want to prove it to themselves that I can stop on my own, and they would, sometimes even for a considerable amount of time. But regardless of any of that stuff, if they ever did drink, if they're in the scenario where they just had one drink, something changed in their mind. That change in the mind, I believe, is what makes someone an alcoholic. I think, a lot of people argue and debate about how much of it is like a genetic and a physical thing, how much of it is mental. Whatever you want to label that thing under, that switch that flips, whatever you want to put that as, it's real. It's something that just occurs in people. And like I said, I know family members and friends throughout my life who they would check a lot of boxes for what makes an alcoholic, but they weren't. And one major difference was that there was plenty of times, and this was amazing to me, where they would have a couple and then they would stop. And that difference is so huge, because it's not just, again, amounts or frequency or anything like that. It's that experience that goes on in the mind, because that is one thing. I talked about how I more and more became a raging alcoholic, and kind of where I started, regardless of regardless of that trajectory of how much I was drinking, how much trouble I was getting in, how much I was just fully immersed in the alcoholic life. Regardless of that, every single time I drank, I still had that switch. Even when there was times where I just, I was in like high school and I maybe just drank on the weekends, or even there was times where I took breaks from it, for whatever reason. I didn't take many of them. But when I did, and I didn't even want to drink, it didn't matter. I still had that switch that flipped whenever I had alcohol in my system. And I think that's, there's so many different ways you can measure and classify, or, try to judge if someone's an alcoholic, someone or just if you wonder for yourself. I would just say consider that. Consider how many times you drank, and of your own volition, not because of circumstances, not because of, something that was causing you not to. Of your own volition, you had a couple and you put it down. And how many times did you actually want to do that? That would be something that was super foreign to me. To actually have a couple and be like, I don't want to have any more. That never occurred to me. And even people that have a drinking history than I did, that are alcoholic, that never occurred to them either. I hope this video has been informative, helpful. For those out there that are in recovery, keep it up. For those that are still struggling, I hope the best for you. And for those that have loved ones and friends or people they know that are struggling with this too, just be patient, or, think about yourself. It's something they got to do on their own. And for those people that are just curious or interested in the subject, thanks for watching.